Have you ever been in a situation where you constantly had to prove yourself? No matter how many times you proved yourself, it just wasn't enough, and whoever it was that you were dealing with constantly doubted you and needed more proof that you were capable, or more proof that you were who you said you were. Well, when I worked in the aerospace industry, I became a program manager of a program that had started a few months before. So the team was pretty much already in place, and there was an interim program manager there until they brought me on as the permanent program manager. And I found myself in that situation where, it's one thing to have the title, but you always have to prove that you deserve to be there. And some of the staff kind of knew me from previous projects, and so they pretty much accepted me. But there are others who they needed to know that I wasn't just one of those management types, but I actually had the technical background too, because it was a technical project for the Air Force, and so it just took a while. But finally, eventually, they realized that he's on par with where he should be technically as well as management wise, and finally, we got the team together and we did a good job for the customer. Well, we're in our left it over there. We're in our study through the book of Mark, and today we're going to be in chapter 8, and we're going to see that Jesus is kind of in that same situation where he's constantly having to prove himself, either to the religious leaders or even to his own disciples. So we're going to start in chapter 8, verses 1 through 10. And this chapter begins with a second account of Jesus feeding a whole bunch of people with just a little bit of food. So Mark chapter 8, verses 1 through 10. In those days, when again a great crowd had gathered, and they had nothing to eat, he called his disciples to him and said to them, I have compassion on the crowd, because they have been with me now 3 days and have nothing to eat. And if I send them away hungry to their homes, they will faint on the way. And some of them have come from far away. And his disciples answered him, How can one feed these people with bread here in this desolate place? And he asked them, How many loaves do you have? They said, 7. And he directed the crowd to sit down on the ground. And he took the 7 loaves, and having given thanks, he broke them and gave them to his disciples to set before the people. And they set them before the crowd. And they had a few small fish. And having blessed them, he said that these also should be set before them. And they ate and were satisfied. And they took up the broken pieces left over, 7 baskets full. And there were about 4,000 people. And he sent them away. And immediately he got into the boat with his disciples and went to the district of Dalmanutha. So this is the second time that the disciples have seen Jesus feed thousands of people with just a few loaves and fish. They had already seen the feeding of the 5,000. So you kind of wonder, why did they kind of argue or question Jesus when he said, these people are hungry, we need to feed them? They'd already seen the miracle of the feeding of the 5,000. Did they not understand Jesus' power? Were they still doubtful, needing Jesus to prove himself some more? Well, in their defense, I think the first thing is they knew it was not within their power to feed this many people. The people were there for 3 days, not sure exactly when they ran out of food, if they had any food at all. If they ate it all the first day, and now here it is, 2 additional days without any food. But however long it was, Jesus was concerned that, they haven't had anything to eat in a while, and if we send them home, they're going to faint on their way home. So we need to take care of their physical needs. So they, as the disciples, they knew, they can't do this. And they probably didn't want to presume that Jesus was going to do another miracle like he had done before. So I don't know that they were necessarily questioning Jesus' ability. It was just more, well, we can't feed them, so are you going to? And there's a subtle difference between these two accounts in the discussion between Jesus and the disciples. Back in Mark chapter 6, verse 38, in the feeding of the 5,000, we're told, "And he said to them, 'How many loaves do you have? Go and see.' And when they had found out, they said, 5 and 2 fish." Well, here in this account, in verse 5, we're told in that conversation, similar conversation, he asked them, "How many loaves do you have?" And this time they had the answer, right? They didn't have to go look for it. They said, "Oh, we've got 7." So it could be kind of in the back of their mind, they're saying, "No, these people have been here for 3 days. We're building up to another miracle." They'd been around Jesus enough that they may have anticipated this time. Or at least they didn't want to be caught unaware and having to go find out again. So they were ready. They said, "Oh, we have 7 loaves." And again, remember, these aren't loaves of bread like we have. They're probably more like what we would call a dinner roll. It's a smaller, personal size loaf of bread that they're dealing with here. So they bring the 7 loaves. And once again, Jesus takes the little bit that the disciples had and he multiplies it, enough to feed 4,000 people and have 7 baskets of leftovers. So the lesson for us here is that Jesus can multiply whatever little bit we have to offer to him. But notice he didn't just feed the 4,000 people. The disciples had to give something first. They had to, well, what do you have? He wants to work through us, but we have to give something. We have to have something in for him to work with. And no matter how small it is, no matter how small it may seem to us, he can multiply that to accomplish his will. And his will at that time was to take care of the physical needs of these people. Another lesson that we learn from this is that Jesus has compassion. And he says, these people have been here 3 days and they're hungry, and I'm compassion on them. So we need to do something. Jesus is compassionate. He's concerned with the physical well-being of these people. He had been ministering to the spiritual well-being for the 3 days as he was teaching them the spiritual truths. But now he's also compassionate about their physical needs. Jesus has compassion on us. He wants to take care of our physical needs, yes, but he also wants to take care of our spiritual needs. He has compassion on the lost. He doesn't want anyone to perish. That's why he came. That's why he gave his life for us. He doesn't want any to perish. We all have equal opportunity to receive the gift of salvation that Jesus offers us. It doesn't matter what your economic background is, what your national background is, what your gender is. God is an equal opportunity God. He offers salvation to all of us. It's up to each one of us to accept that gift of salvation. Continuing in verses 11 through 13, the Pharisees came and began to argue with him, seeking from him a sign from heaven to test him. And he sighed deeply in his spirit and said, "Why does this generation seek a sign? Truly, I say to you, no sign will be given to this generation." And he left them, got into the boat again, and went to the other side. So here again we see the religious leaders wanting Jesus to prove himself. They knew that he was performing miracles. They didn't like him. They were keeping a pretty close eye on him because they were hoping to trip him up, catch him doing something that they could accuse him of and put him to death for. So they knew he was performing miracles, but they were attributing it to Satan. And he kept saying that he was the Son of God. And they're saying, okay, well, if what you're doing is from heaven, then give us a sign. Give us, prove yourself, as if all those miracles weren't enough proof for them. Prove yourself again. Prove yourself again. Give us a sign from heaven so we know that what you're doing is from heaven and not from somewhere else. There was plenty of proof all around them, but they chose not to see it. And there's people in this world today that look at Jesus and they choose not to believe that he is who he says he is. Jesus isn't going to give us a sign. He didn't give them a sign, and he's not going to give us any more signs that he hasn't already given us. You know, his miraculous birth, his death, burial, and resurrection, all of the miracles that he performed, all the miracles that his disciples later performed. Now, there are plenty of signs out there. If you want signs, they are there. But he's not going to, paint anything in the sky saying, yep, it's me, until that day when he comes, and everybody will know. That's the sign. That's the only other sign we're going to see is when he returns. So he wants us to have faith. He wants us to believe through faith. They say seeing is believing. Well, there was a lot of things that these people saw and they still didn't believe. So it takes faith. We need to accept the proof, the signs that he's already given us, and have faith that he is who he says he is. He did pay the penalty of our sin. He has given us eternal life for those who accept that gift. Verses 14 through 21. Now they had forgotten to bring bread, and they had only one loaf with them in the boat. And he cautioned them, saying, "Watch out. Be aware of the leaven of the Pharisees and the leaven of Herod." And they began discussing with one another the fact that they had no bread. And Jesus, aware of this, said to them, "Why are you discussing the fact that you have no bread? Do you not yet perceive or understand? Are your hearts hardened? Having eyes, do you not see? And having ears, do you not hear? And do you not remember? When I broke the 5 loaves for the 5,000, how many baskets full of broken pieces did you take up?" They said to him, 12. "And the 7 for the 4,000, how many baskets full of broken pieces did you take up?" And they said to him, 7. And he said to them, "Do you not yet understand?" So picture what's going on here. He spent 3 days with 4,000 people on the other side of the Sea of Galilee. Then after he sent them off, they got in the boat and they crossed the sea, came on the shore, and we don't know how much time they were on the shore, but eventually the Pharisees approached him and asked for the sign. And Jesus had enough, and they got back in the boat and went over. Well, evidently, I don't know what happened to those 7 baskets full of leftovers. They either weren't edible and they discarded them, or maybe they sent them home with the crowd, or they were long enough on the other side that they ate them or gave them to those in need on the other side. But in any event, when it came time to get in the boat, they weren't prepared. Jesus says, "Let's go, guys." And they weren't anticipating that they were going to head back so early. So they only have 1 loaf of bread. And then Jesus takes this situation with the Pharisees, and he's taking it as a teaching moment, right? Jesus did that a lot with his disciples. Something would happen, and he would use it as a teaching moment. There's a spiritual lesson that I want you to learn related to this physical thing that just happened. So Jesus tells them, "Watch out, beware of the leaven of the Pharisees and the leaven of Herod." He's talking spiritually. And in the Jewish world, leaven was synonymous with sin in a spiritual sense. And so he's saying, beware of the sin of the Pharisees, beware of the sin of Herod. You see, the Pharisees thought that the Messiah was going to come, and all they could see was the physical aspect of their Messiah. They didn't think about Messiah in truly a spiritual sense. It was just all physical. He was going to be a warrior king. He was going to establish a physical kingdom. He was going to win physical battles. He was going to do physical miracles, and he was going to free them from Roman rule. And they just totally missed any spiritual significance, any eternal significance to what was going on here. It was all physical for them. And so Jesus is trying to prepare his disciples for the true, what really is going to happen with the Messiah. And he is the Messiah. And he wants them to stop thinking in earthly terms and start thinking in eternal terms and spiritual terms. But rather than understanding this teaching moment, they're paranoid because they only have one loaf of bread. And so when they hear leaven, they're thinking leaven, bread. Uh-oh, he knows. We weren't prepared. We only have one loaf of bread. And they're stuck in the physical. That's exactly what he's trying to teach them. You're stuck in the physical world here. Stop thinking physically. And in effect, what he's saying to them is, why would I be concerned that you only brought one loaf of bread? You've just seen me feed 5,000 people and then 4,000 people. Don't you think I can take care of your physical need? If we get hungry, I can take care of that. Why are you wrapped up in this physical stuff? Stop worrying about physical stuff and start seeing things from a spiritual perspective. And when I think about it, we are no different than the disciples. We live in a physical world. And it's hard for us sometimes to get our minds wrapped around spiritual things when we're dealing with so many physical things right in front of us. We physically have to have food and clothing and a house and jobs and all the things that take our attention. And we are in the physical world right now, so it's hard for us to think beyond that. And Jesus is trying to get the disciples to think beyond the here and now and think about the long-term picture. Think about the spiritual, the eternal things. Jesus wants us to see him and ourselves in the spiritual, eternal perspective. Because actually, Jesus can take care of our physical needs. And I'm sure many of you have stories, as I do, of how, in our lowest point, God provided for us. Physically, when we had needs, God was there to provide. But he is more concerned with our spiritual needs. And that's what he wants us to focus on. In verses 22 through 26, and they came to Bethsaida, and some people brought to him a blind man and begged him to touch him. And he took the blind man by the hand and led him out of the village. And when he had spit on his eyes and laid his hands on him, he asked him, "Do you see anything?" And he looked up and said, "I see people, but they look like trees walking." Then Jesus laid his hands on his eyes again, and he opened his eyes, and he opened his eyes. His sight was restored, and he saw everything clearly. And he sent him to his home, saying, "Do not even enter the village." Now, this is another one of the unique miracles that Mark records for us that the other gospel writers didn't include. They included other cases of Jesus healing blind people, but this miracle is unique in a couple ways. One is that it's in Mark's gospel only, and it's the only miracle that we have recorded, the miracle of Jesus, that Jesus did in stages. Right? Usually he would heal somebody and boom, it was instant. Well, this one isn't instant, and it kind of raises some questions. Why was there a gradual healing? Why didn't the man get his sight crisp and clear the first time? Why did Jesus have to do it twice? Is that a limit to Jesus' power, or what's going on here? Well, there's two reasons, two lessons that we can learn from this. One is a physical, and one is spiritual. On the physical side, notice this is similar to when he healed the deaf man. Jesus takes the blind man out of the crowd, out of the village, off by himself. And this is, again, Jesus showing the compassion that he has. Can you imagine if you were blind, and the scholars believe that he was blind from birth, so you've never been able to see before, and if you were given your sight and the first thing you see is this crowd of people pressing in around you and cheering and hollering, it would just be a sensory overload, and it could be very disheartening to this man. So he takes him out privately and heals him privately. And then another thing, if you've ever been in a dark place, very dark place, like a cave or in a dark room, and then suddenly you're put out in the light. You step out of the cave or somebody turns the lights on in the room. It's very harsh. It's very painful. And what do? We close our eyes. We shield our eyes from the light. Well, this guy's been blind probably his whole life. And so the first thing Jesus does is he gives him partial sight. Right? He sees, but it's all blurry. So it's kind of letting his eyes get used to the idea of seeing because they haven't seen before. And then he gives him his full sight back in a gradual way. So he was looking out for his physical well-being. But there's also spiritual lessons here. Because from a Christian perspective, we worship an eternal God. And our finite mind has a hard time, and we will never fully understand our infinite God. And so in a way, it's representing that we see God in little bits and pieces. As we mature in our Christian walk, maybe we can see God a little more clearly and a little more clearly, but we're never really going to see him clearly until we stand before him in eternity. And the Apostle Paul wrote about this in 1 Corinthians chapter 13, verse 12, when he said, "For now we see in a mirror dimly, but then face to face. Now I know in part, then I shall know fully, even as I have been fully known." So that blind man getting his sight is kind of representative of our Christian walk, our Christian life, that we see God, but not truly as clear as he really is. We only, as we study and grow and learn, we learn a little bit more and a little bit more, but we're never going to fully understand him until we stand before him in eternity. And the same is true for new Christians. And as older, more mature Christians, those who have been Christians for a longer time, we forget that sometimes. When somebody accepts Jesus as their Lord and Savior and they're a newborn babe in Christ, we kind of think, oh, now you're one of us and you know as much as we do and you know the lingo that we use and all those kind of things. And we forget that they're babes. They need to grow. Right now they're just barely seeing God for the first time. And they don't see him as clearly as we do. And we need to give them time. We need to nurture them. We need to help them grow and help them improve in their eyesight on who Jesus is and who God is and understand his word. So we need to give them some grace. We need to nurture them in their spiritual growth. All of us should be constantly learning, constantly growing, constantly improving our eyesight, our spiritual eyesight, and becoming clearer and clearer as we grow and mature. Well, I'm going to stop here in chapter 8, and we'll pick up the rest of the chapter next time. But just some of the takeaways from this chapter so far is that we need to realize that there's a physical aspect to our Christian life, but there's also a spiritual or eternal aspect. There's a temporal aspect, those physical needs, the temporariness of living here on earth. And then there's the eternal aspect of our Christian life. Yes, we have physical needs. We have to eat. We need clothes. We need a shelter. And God is there to help us take care of those physical needs. But our time here on earth is just a blip on the grand scale of eternity. So even if things aren't going well, don't work out too well for us here physically in this world, we have all eternity to look forward to. And it's because of the assurance that we have in Jesus Christ, the knowing that he paid the penalty of our sin. And it's just by grace that he gives us the offer of salvation, that we have that salvation, that no one can take it away. And that's what helps us get through this little temporary time that we have here on earth. And we can suffer through whatever we have to suffer through, knowing that one day we will see God in all his glory. We will be in heaven with him as his children because of what Christ has done for us. So persevere through this physical life that we're in, because we know that in the long term, Christ has won the victory for us. Our eternity, we have eternity to look forward to. And use that as a motivation to get through whatever it is you're dealing with in your life. If you have accepted Jesus Christ as your Lord and Savior, you've accepted that free gift of salvation, you have all of eternity to look forward to. May that help you get through the short time that we have here on earth. It's kind of like, kids at school, right? There's 3 more weeks to the semester. Come on, you can get through. That's where we are. There's just a short time left of our time here. We can get through it because what lies ahead is so glorious. Praise be to God.